Chapter 361. Duncan was seen kneeling before a pile of fire. Was the unburned body on the fire Sheldon? Zeno looked shocked. Sheldon's net worth was worth billions. Not only was there no funeral after his death, but they could not even afford to send him to a funeral parlor. If Zeno were Sheldon, he would die with his eyes wide open. Nash turned his head and glanced at the robust man next to him. This was a Stage 9 grade Grandmaster. It was unexpected for the Dorsons to have hidden such a powerful individual. Even the Watsons only had 2 grade Grandmasters, Iron Kick George and 8 Trigram Palm Jansen, with powers at Stage 6 and 7. Together, they could rival a Stage 9 grade Grandmaster, but defeating one was another question. Duncan, Mr. Nash is here. Zeno spoke up as a reminder. They could not possibly let Mr. Nash see them cremating Sheldon, could they? Duncan wiped his tears, trembled as he stood up, and bowed to Nash. He said, "I apologize for not greeting you from afar, Mr. Calcraft. It's due to the funeral." Nash coldly asked, "Did you kill Sheldon?" Duncan looked bewildered. "Mr. Calcraft, although Sheldon wasn't my biological grandfather, I've been with the Dorsons for over 20 years. Surely, no one could do such a heinous act." Nash slapped his palm toward the fire pile. A true energy extinguished the flames. Only the charred skeletal frame remained. It was smoking on the ground. "Zeno, take the bones for DNA testing to confirm the identity of the deceased. Every inch must be examined." Nash spoke slowly and resonantly. Duncan's pupils suddenly constricted, and his face instantly turned pale. Seeing this, Nash asked in a cold voice, "Where's Sheldon Dorson?" A powerful aura enveloped Duncan's entire body. Feeling as though he had been encased in ice, Duncan could not help but shudder and gulp. He then said, He was buried by me." Zeno was furious. "Do you really think we're idiots? If Sheldon was truly dead, Duncan surely would not create the illusion of cremation here. He would have let Mr. Nash see Sheldon's corpse." Even though Zeno had been fooled, Mr. Nash would not be so easily deceived. "My grandfather's last wish was to be buried with an intact corpse. So take me to see the body." Nash spoke indifferently. Sheldon was involved in the extermination case of the Youngs. He was a dead man. Nash had to see him alive or dead, otherwise, the entire Dorsons would be annihilated. Duncan swallowed again, and he led Nash to the private forest behind the villa. Pine and cedar trees were planted here, and there was a grave in the middle, in which lay a coffin made of yellow pearwood. Zeno jumped into the grave and forcefully pushed open the coffin lid. Inside lay Sheldon, clothed in formal attire, his face bloodless and lips purple. Gold, silver, and jewels were placed around him as burial items. Zeno reached in to feel Sheldon's carotid artery for a moment and said, "No pulse, stiff corpse, and no temperature. He should be dead." Nash nodded and slowly exhaled. Duncan, overwhelmed with sorrow, said, "My grandfather has already paid with his life. I hope you'll leave his body intact." Zeno jumped out of the grave. Nash turned and walked away, with Duncan and the robust men following him. After walking about 10 meters, Nash suddenly turned and threw a punch. A huge fist formed from dense true energy hit the coffin. The priceless yellow pearwood coffin, along with Sheldon's body, were reduced to pieces. Bright red flesh fell to the ground, making a thudding sound. Specks of blood splattered onto the mourning clothes Duncan was wearing. The robust man's eyes turned red instantly, his bones cracking as he let out a ghastly roar. "Beast, you should die." Visible ripples spread out, breaking all the surrounding cedar and pine trees in half. Nash pulled Zeno behind him and casually threw a slap. A palm the size of a ping-pong paddle, seemingly composed of clear water, formed in the air. The lines of the palm were clearly visible. The palm slapped the robust man's face. The robust man's head shattered. He was a Stage 9 grade Grandmaster, and he was gone just like that. Chapter 362. Brutal. Nash was too brutal. That was a Stage 9 grade Grandmaster. He was the world-class expert Duncan brought back from Mandagore. Duncan learned all his skills from him. Was he not one of Duncan's biggest trump cards too? Yet now, Nash wiped him out with a single slap. Duncan was terrified. almost feeling his scalp explode. His once gentle face turned pale as paper. He thought his plan was flawless. It seemed he had underestimated Nash. Nash was not just the smiling Grim Reaper who was skilled in killing, he also possessed a meticulous mind. Sheldon is dead, and my grudge with the Dorsons is settled. You do have some sense in you, but don't be too clever. There are things better left unsaid. I trust you know what to do. After saying these words emotionlessly, Nash left with Zeno. Having witnessed Nash crush Crow's head before and now seeing it again, Zeno felt a churn in his stomach. Duncan watched their retreating figures tremblingly. Then, he turned back to the bloody grave and sighed deeply. Grandfather, I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you. But at least you preserved the Dorsons' lineage with your life. In order to deal with Nash, Duncan had prepared 3 plans. First, he tried to deceive Nash with a fake cremated body. If Nash found out, he would activate the second plan and show Nash his grandfather's corpse. He met a witch doctor in Mandragore who had a potion that could induce a death-like state in a person, making even the blood coagulate. When Nash left, he thought his grandfather was safe, but Nash still destroyed his grandfather to pieces. Finally, he held the secret of Nash being from the Youngs. If the first 2 steps failed, he would have threatened Nash using this knowledge to let himself and the rest of the Dorsons go. He even set up over 30 timed emails to be sent out, all to ensure Nash would not kill him outright. These 3 plans could be said to be foolproof. However, he never expected Nash to be so thorough. He first realized the cremated body was not Sheldon and then completely destroyed the coffin and its contents. The third plan was unnecessary since Nash never intended to wipe out the entire Dorsons. Nash's final words indicated he knew Duncan had deduced his identity. If Duncan revealed this secret, the Dorsons would surely perish. Duncan, with his secretly trained bodyguards, went to the villa's underground garage. Inside, the 36 members of the Dorsons were gathered. The men played poker, the women shopped on their tablets, and the children played happily together. Done. Have you killed that Nash guy yet? Duncan's adoptive father, Quinton Dorson, asked. Seeing the bodyguards Duncan brought, his adoptive father's eyelids twitched. The rest of the Dorsons turned to look as well. I've arranged for all of you to immigrate. You'll settle in Malaga tomorrow, Duncan said calmly. Hearing this, the Dorsons became furious. Duncan, what do you mean? You're just an adopted son. Are you trying to take over the Dorsons? Chapter 363. Hey Emph, one can never be satisfied. No matter how much one gets, can you handle the Dorsons' billions of assets? Do you believe we can kick you out of the Dorsons immediately? Duncan's bodyguard pulled out a golden Desert Eagle and fired a shot into the sky. Everyone at the scene instantly fell silent. Duncan adjusted his glasses and said, Grandfather was killed by Nash. If you all want to live peacefully, go settle abroad. Each of you can take 300 million with you. With this money, you can live luxuriously anywhere without any worries. Uncle Duncan, do we get some too? A porcelain doll-like little girl asked nervously. Children get 500 million, Duncan said with a soft smile. The Dorsons looked at each other, seemingly exchanging opinions. Quinton approached Duncan, whispering, Dun, why is Nash targeting us? Why does he want to harm us? Duncan smiled faintly. Dad, sometimes knowing too much isn't good for you. Then you should come with us. We can turn the company's assets into cash and build a business empire abroad. Quinton sighed. He was getting old and only had this adopted son, so going abroad would mean depending only on his wife. The Dorsons' decades of accumulated connections shouldn't go to waste. Let's settle this then. This afternoon, I'll have my secretary deliver international checks to all of you. After saying these words, Duncan turned and left. After some discussion, the other Dorsons eventually compromised. They did not have a choice. While Duncan looked gentle and harmless, if provoked, he might even kill them all. Zeno drove Nash back to Royal Bay. In the car, Zeno asked, Mr. Nash, how did you figure out the cremated body wasn't Sheldon Dorson? I guessed it. That's an accurate guess. Zeno laughed and continued. How did you know the Sheldon in the coffin wasn't dead? I guessed again. Nash replied calmly while looking out of the window. The fact that Duncan deduced he was one of the Youngs showed that Duncan was quite sharp. If Nash were just any ordinary person, it would be possible to be fooled. But Nash was the smiling Grim Reaper. One of the characteristics of Nash's mission was that he must confirm that his target was dead. Even if he saw a body, he would make sure to finish it off, even beheading it if necessary. What if Duncan reveals your identity? Zeno admired Nash deeply but was also worried about Duncan's revenge. Even if the clients find out, they won't dare to act rashly without a surefire way to kill me. Nash was only concerned about the clients targeting those close to him. Hiding his identity as a Young was the best way to protect Hira and his close friends. By the way, take me to the Long Lake Industrial Zone first. Thinking of Yasmin's arm tattoo, Nash decided to find her and gather some information. At the same time, he also called Theo. Nashi, I've missed you. Did you make any progress on the hieroglyphs I sent you? Nash cut straight to the point. Not yet. They're strange. Over 100 scholars from the Ancient Text Research Institute couldn't determine the dynasty. Some experts believe they're not from Earth, or perhaps it's a unique language from a particular tribe. I plan to release some of the hieroglyphs with a reward for deciphering them online. With online dissemination, more people can research, and perhaps someone will recognize the hieroglyphs. Chapter 364. Upon hearing Theo's idea, Nash slightly furrowed his brows, saying, "Be careful. The Kleins originated from the Youngs. The Kleins might not recognize those hieroglyphs, but they might have seen them during their time with the Youngs. Letting them know that the Skies were researching the Youngs' hieroglyphs could potentially bring trouble." In the Long Lake Industrial Zone, Nash and Zeno were stopped by an elderly security guard at the entrance. Zeno pulled out a $100 note and handed it to the security guard. "Sir, could help me find someone named Yasmin. If you bring her out, I'll give you another 100. "Young man, I might be poor, but I have my pride." The guard promptly pushed back Zeno's money. Zeno's temper flared. Grabbing the security guard by his collar, he said, "Old man, have you heard of Dragon Tiger Gate? I'm Zeno Hun, the second in command. Who do you think you're messing with here?" Expecting his name to intimidate the guard, Zeno was caught off guard when the old man defiantly leaned in closer, challenging, "Go ahead, hit me. Even the richest men in Johnford wouldn't dare lay a finger on me, let alone someone from Dragon Tiger Gate." Zeno smirked. It seems you have some backing, huh?" The security guard proudly replied, "My son, Jupiter Holt, has been working in the Johnford inspection office for over 20 years. Why would I fear a small-time thug like you?" When Zeno heard that his son was Jupiter, his confidence deflated. He released the security guard, adjusting his collar and laughing. "I was just joking. Sir, please don't take it seriously." Due to his own background, how could he dare to offend anyone from the inspection office? Not to mention his son was a captain and had been there for over 20 years. Zeno would not want the places under him to be visited by people from the inspection office every 3 days. The security guard lifted up his collar, put his hands behind his back, and nonchalantly replied, "You'd better leave before I lose my temper." Feeling defeated, Zeno looked at Nash. The old man was not budging. It seemed getting into the Long Lake Industrial Zone would be challenging. Suddenly, a pink Porsche parked nearby. Sydney and Queenie got out. Queenie seemed a bit car-sick and complained, "What's so good about this industrial zone? The roads are bad, the buildings are about to collapse, and you want to buy it all. I really can't understand your reasoning." She often heard from her grandfather about how she should learn from Sydney. In his eyes, Sydney was superior in every way. They were of the same age, went to the same private school, and during college, both took over some family businesses. She worked hard as well, but not all of her effort was rewarded. Despite being the same age as her, Sydney had already made a lot of money. Meanwhile, Queenie was still asking her grandfather for pocket money. This time around, Grandpa had refused to give her any pocket money and even banned her from going around. Fortunately for her, Grandpa still allowed her to go out with Sydney. It was the weekend, so she had convinced Sydney to take her out. She was expecting a good time but had not expected to end up in the remote Long Lake Industrial Zone. The Long Lake Industrial Zone is very near to Cloud Peak Palace Hotel. At its peak, there were more than 20,000 employees here. Do you know how much the convenience stores and restaurants here earn annually? Sydney asked with a smile. How much? The convenience store nets around 2.7 million, and the restaurants earn around 3 million. Oh my God. Are you joking? Queenie's eyes widened in surprise. The fast food in those restaurants only costs more than $10 a serving. Meanwhile, the convenience store had an area of less than 50 square meters. With such modest prices and facilities, how could they net such profits? Chapter 365. Upon reconsidering, Queenie understood. The Long Lake Industrial Zone was located in a somewhat remote area. Within a 10-mile radius, aside from Cloud Peak Palace Hotel, there were only a few shops. They essentially monopolized the daily life of those in the Long Lake Industrial Zone. But isn't the population of Long Lake Industrial Zone much lower now than before? Queenie found a point worth arguing. Based on the previous population of 20,000, this area indeed was profitable. However, now, most of the factories in Long Lake Industrial Zone were vacant, with the population not exceeding 8,000. That's because the buildings in the Long Lake Industrial Zone are aging and the living conditions are very poor. This leads to a high turnover rate among the younger employees. Without sufficient technical staff, the industrial zone naturally declines. I just need to invest 300 million to completely change the current situation here. Sydney held her little hands behind her back, her eyes shining with confidence. If it were not for the Porsche parked nearby, passersby might have thought they were delusional. After all, they were so young and casually talking about investing hundreds of millions. Who would take them seriously? Wait, isn't that Nash Calcraft? Queenie noticed Nash at the entrance of the industrial zone and blinked in surprise. Sydney turned to look and indeed, it was Nash. What was he doing here? Sydney quickly checked her reflection in a compact mirror and hurried over. Nash! Sydney greeted him sweetly. Nash was taken aback. As far as he remembered, the young miss from the Zell family did not seem to have a favorable opinion of him. Why the sudden change? Then it clicked. She was the owner of Cloud Peak Palace Hotel, so it was not surprising that she knew his identity. Miss Zell, hello. Nash greeted with a smile. What brings you here? Sydney's face lit up with two cute dimples when she smiled. Just taking a stroll, Nash replied casually. Zeno added, actually, we want to enter the industrial zone, but the security guard won't let us in. Why bother with pretenses now? Sydney and Queenie were obviously not here just to wander around. Maybe they knew someone inside? I can help you with that. Sydney walked up to the security guard and said, Sir, these two are my friends. Please let them in. The security guard, who was smoking, glanced at Sydney and asked, And who are you? Sydney frowned slightly. I'm Sydney Zell. My grandfather is Grant Zell. She had only discussed buying the place with the owner of the industrial zone. This guard had never seen her before. Hence, she had to mention her grandfather's name. I can't let you in even if Walter Watson came, unless the company's boss personally welcomes you. The security guard crossed his legs, clearly not regarding Sydney highly. Queenie smirked. So can we or can't we? If not, let's not push it. With a stern face, Sydney took out her phone and called the owner of the industrial zone. Mr. Jamerson, I'm buying Long Lake Industrial Zone. I'm paying in full. Please come out and meet me now.